Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we bring you an unforgettable tale of love, betrayal, and redemption that will leave you reflecting on the power of second chances. In a small American high school, one boy's dream turns into his worst nightmare. But the story doesn't end there. Through unexpected friendships and hard-earned lessons, he discovers strength, while a once proud girl learns the value of humility and kindness. Join us as we unravel this emotional journey of heartbreak and hope, proving that everyone has the power to change. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's story. Andrew was the kind of boy who stayed invisible in the bustling halls of Jefferson High. At 17, his heavy frame and awkward demeanor made him an easy target for the cruel taunts of his classmates. Weighing 220 pounds, he often heard the sharp sting of words like whale or fatso thrown carelessly by those who seemed to find joy in his pain. These words were daggers, each one embedding deeper into his heart. Despite the teasing, Andrew had a sensitive soul. He dreamed of a life beyond the walls of ridicule and loneliness. His escape came in the form of Jessica, the shining star of Jefferson High. Jessica wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. Her golden hair caught the sunlight as though it had been crafted by the heavens. And her laughter, though often unkind, resonated like a melody. Andrew adored her from afar, a love he harbored silently, knowing it was futile. But then, the impossible happened. Jessica invited him to her party. Her words were casual, yet they carried a weight Andrew had never known. "You should come," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. Andrew's heart raced, his cheeks flushing as he nodded in stunned agreement. That night, as he lay in bed, he imagined all the ways this could change his life. Maybe she'd finally see him. Maybe he wasn't so invisible after all. In his excitement, Andrew went to extraordinary lengths to prepare for the party. He rented a sleek black suit that hugged his frame just right, hoping to mask the insecurities he carried with him. He borrowed a luxury car, its polished exterior gleaming with a promise of sophistication. And because he wanted everything to be perfect, he spent his savings and even borrowed money from friends to buy Jessica expensive gifts. A delicate silver bracelet and a bouquet of roses sat in the passenger seat as he drove to her house, his heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and hope. The party was everything Andrew had imagined, a glittering scene of high school revelry. Laughter echoed through Jessica's spacious home, lights twinkling like stars as music pulsed through the air. Andrew entered cautiously, his gift-wrapped offerings clutched tightly in his hands. He spotted Jessica across the room, radiant and confident, and his heart thudded. This was it. When he approached her, Jessica greeted him with that same dazzling smile. And for a moment, Andrew felt a spark of courage. He handed her the gifts, his voice barely above a whisper as he said, "I hope you like these." Jessica's laughter, usually so enchanting, suddenly felt cold. Her friends giggled beside her, and Andrew's stomach twisted. "Hey, everyone," she called out, waving to the crowd. "Can I have your attention?" Andrew stood frozen, his heart pounding with anticipation. Maybe she was about to thank him, to acknowledge his efforts. But then her words came, and they cut deeper than any of the taunts he had ever endured. "It was all a bet," Jessica announced, her voice dripping with mockery. "I just wanted to see if I could get him to come." The room erupted in laughter. Andrew's vision blurred as the humiliation crashed over him like a tidal wave. Jessica's boyfriend stepped forward, his arms slung possessively around her shoulders. "Do you really think you could ever afford someone like Jessica?" he sneered, his words dripping with disdain. Andrew's face burned with shame. The laughter seemed to echo endlessly, each sound a hammer blow to his heart. He wanted to run, to vanish, to disappear from this nightmare. Without another word, he turned and bolted from the house, the sound of their jeers following him into the night. Back home, Andrew locked himself in his room and let the tears flow freely. He cried until his throat ached, his body trembling with the weight of his humiliation. The betrayal. The cruelty, it was too much. Seeking solace, he picked up his phone, only to find clips of his mortifying experience spreading across social media. The comments were relentless. The hashtags mocking his name. Andrew felt like the world had conspired against him. As the days passed, the pain in Andrew's chest evolved into something darker. The sting of humiliation gave way to a smoldering anger. It wasn't just Jessica who had hurt him, it was everyone who had laughed. Everyone who had shared those videos. Everyone who had made him feel like less than a person. I will get my revenge, Andrew whispered to himself one night, his voice low and trembling. The boy who once dreamed of love and acceptance now dreamed of retribution. For 2 weeks, he stayed away from school, shutting himself off from the world. His phone remained off, and even his closest friends couldn't reach him. Alone in his room, Andrew replayed the events of that night over and over, fueling the fire within him. But anger wasn't enough. He needed a plan. And so, as the days turned into weeks, Andrew began to plot the way he would make them all pay. When Andrew finally returned to Jefferson High, he felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. Every hallway seemed to hum with whispers. Every laugh carried an echo of his humiliation. To shield himself from the relentless mockery, he wore a plain black mask. It was meant to hide his face and, with it, the shame he carried. But the mask only made things worse. The moment he walked into his classroom, Jessica's loud, piercing laugh erupted. "Oh look! The masked crusader is here," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The room filled with laughter again, just as it had on that fateful night. Andrew's heart clenched, but he refused to react. He sat down quietly, head bowed, trying to disappear into his desk. Jessica's taunts weren't enough for her. Her closest friend, Courtney, decided to take things a step further. She strutted over to Andrew, her eyes glinting with mischief. "What's under the mask, Andrew? A superhero or a zero?" she mocked as her hand reached out to yank it off. But before she could, a hand shot out and stopped her. "Leave him alone," said a calm but firm voice. It was Rachel, a quiet girl who usually sat unnoticed in the back of the classroom. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, silencing the room. Rachel wasn't like Jessica or her crowd. She was one of the few scholarship students at Jefferson High, the daughter of a hard-working housekeeper. Her mother, Mrs. Hayes, happened to work for Jessica's family, cleaning their sprawling home every day. Rachel knew what it felt like to be ridiculed, to be treated as less than others, and she couldn't stand by while someone else endured the same. Jessica sneered, her face twisting with annoyance. "And what are you going to do about it, Rachel? Don't forget who cleans whose house." The class erupted into laughter again, and Rachel's face turned red. But she stood her ground. "At least my mom knows how to treat people with respect," she shot back, her voice trembling but determined. Andrew, watching from his desk, felt a pang of guilt. Rachel had stood up for him, but it had only brought more ridicule her way. As the day ended, Andrew hurried to catch up with her as she walked home. "Rachel," he called, his voice soft but earnest. She turned, her expression cautious but kind. "Thank you for standing up for me. I mean." Rachel gave him a small, sad smile. "It's okay. People like Jessica think they can treat others however they want. Someone has to tell them no." Andrew hesitated, then asked, "Can we be friends?" Rachel's smile widened, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "Sure, Andrew. Why not?" Their budding friendship became a refuge for Andrew. They began spending more time together, and Rachel's quiet resilience inspired him. One day, as they walked home from school, Rachel opened up about her struggles. "My mom works so hard," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "She cleans Jessica's house every day. But Jessica treats her like she's invisible. Sometimes worse. She even refuses to share a car ride with me when we're going to the same place." Andrew listened, his fists clenching as Rachel described Jessica's cruelty. It was one thing to mock a peer, but to demean someone who worked tirelessly for their family was another level of heartlessness. Their conversation deepened Andrew's resolve. Jessica didn't just deserve a lesson for what she did to him, she needed to face the consequences of how she treated others. That evening, as Andrew sat in his room, he felt a strange mixture of anger and gratitude. Rachel's kindness had shown him a different side of humanity, a side he hadn't experienced in years. But it also fueled his desire for justice. Jessica needed to understand the pain she caused, not just to him, but to everyone she looked down on. Unbeknownst to Andrew, Jessica's cruelty wasn't confined to her words. The very next day, she did something unforgivable. While Rachel and her mom were busy cleaning, Jessica poured a bucket of water onto the floor, laughing as she watched Mrs. Hayes scramble to clean it. Rachel came home to find her mother scrubbing the floor, tears streaming down her face. "What happened?" Rachel demanded, her voice shaking. "It was Jessica," her mother whispered. Broken and defeated, she said I should know my place. Rachel's anger boiled over. She wanted to march straight up to Jessica and tell her exactly what she thought. But her mother stopped her. "It's not worth it, Rachel," she said, her voice weary. "People like her, they never change." But Rachel didn't believe that. People could change. And if they didn't, well, life had its own way of teaching lessons. As Rachel sat with her mother that evening, comforting her as best as she could, Andrew was in his room, formulating a plan. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about standing up for everyone Jessica had ever trampled on. The more Andrew spent time with Rachel, the more determined he became. Jessica's cruelty wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a pattern. She had spent years making others feel small, feeding her own ego at their expense. For Andrew, this wasn't just about what had happened to him at the party, it was about justice. One evening, while Andrew was visiting his cousin Logan, an idea sparked. Logan was a rising country music star, gaining attention across the state. As they hung out, Logan showed Andrew some of the fan messages he'd received on his phone. "Look at this one," Logan said, chuckling as he opened a long thread. "This girl's been messaging me non-stop for months." Andrew glanced at the screen, and his jaw dropped. The messages were from Jessica. Her tone was completely different, polite, almost desperate. She had written things like, "I love your music so much, and it would mean the world to me if you replied." "Jessica," Andrew muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Logan raised an eyebrow. "Wait. You know her? She's the one who humiliated me," Andrew replied, anger flashing in his eyes. But then, an idea began to form. He turned to Logan, a sly smile creeping onto his face. "Logan, can I reply to her? Just this once?" Logan smirked, handing over his phone. "Go for it. Let's see what happens." Andrew typed out a response, pretending to be Logan. "Hey, thanks for your support. Here's my WhatsApp number, let's chat more there." He sent the message and waited. Within minutes, Jessica responded, her excitement almost palpable through the screen. From that moment, Andrew and Jessica began talking. Of course, she didn't know it was Andrew behind the messages. She believed she was chatting with Logan, the rising star. Her tone was sweet, her words carefully crafted to impress. Andrew couldn't help but marvel at the contrast between this Jessica and the one he knew from school. It was almost laughable how quickly her arrogance melted away when she thought she was talking to someone famous. As the days passed, Jessica began confiding in Logan. She told him about the upcoming school prom and how it was going to be the biggest event of the year. "You should come," she wrote, her enthusiasm practically leaping off the screen. "It would be such an honor to go with someone as amazing as you." Andrew's grin widened. "Would you like me to be your date?" he replied, pretending to be Logan. Jessica's response came instantly. Yes, yes, yes. That would be amazing. With the hook set, Andrew began planning the next phase of his revenge. But while Jessica was preoccupied with her fantasies of showing up to prom with a celebrity, Andrew was focused on something far more personal, transforming himself. Rachel, noticing Andrew's renewed drive, suggested they work together to improve his confidence. She started by putting him on a fitness regimen, helping him with workouts after school. You can do this, she said with a smile whenever he felt like giving up. Prove to yourself that you're more than what they see. Andrew worked harder than he ever thought possible. Day by day, he began to see changes not just in his body, but in his mindset. He no longer felt like the defeated boy who had run out of Jessica's party. Instead, he felt stronger, more determined. Meanwhile, Jessica was busy preparing for her dream prom entrance. She wanted everything to be perfect. To fund her extravagant plans, she stole 2 of her mother's most prized possessions, gold necklaces worth a small fortune. Jessica sold one and hid the other, using the money to rent a luxury car and buy the most expensive gown she could find. She couldn't wait to make her grand entrance with Logan, imagining the awe and envy of her classmates. Unbeknownst to her, Andrew's plan was nearing its climax. As the prom approached, he sent Jessica another message as Logan. There's been a little problem, he wrote. My car was in an accident, and I'm not sure I'll be able to make it. Jessica, desperate to salvage her fantasy, quickly replied, Don't worry about the car. I can pick you up. Just tell me where to meet you. Andrew chuckled to himself. Everything was falling into place. But amidst his plotting, he found solace in his growing bond with Rachel. What had started as a simple friendship was blossoming into something deeper. Her unwavering support and kindness had shown Andrew what real connection looked like. And for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of happiness. As the big night loomed closer, Andrew stood before his mirror, staring at his reflection. Gone was the timid, overweight boy who had been humiliated at Jessica's party. In his place stood someone new, stronger, more confident, and ready to face the world. But first, he had a score to settle. The night of the prom arrived, and the atmosphere at Jefferson High was electric. The school gymnasium had been transformed into a dazzling ballroom, with glittering lights and music filling the air. Students arrived in elegant outfits, buzzing with excitement. It was the night they'd all been waiting for, the night to see and be seen. Jessica stood in front of her mirror, admiring her reflection. Her dress was a vision of glamour, a shimmering golden gown that hugged her figure perfectly. Her hair was styled into soft waves, and her makeup accentuated her already striking features. She looked every bit the queen she believed she was destined to be. Tonight, she thought, would be her moment to shine. But something nagged at her. Logan, the celebrity date she had boasted about to everyone, hadn't responded to her last few messages. She had texted him repeatedly, asking for confirmation about their meeting point. But he remained silent. Just as she began to worry, her phone buzzed with a message. Meet me at the school entrance, it read. Jessica let out a sigh of relief, her excitement returning in full force. She grabbed her rented luxury purse and made her way to the venue in the sleek car she had rented using the stolen necklace money. When Jessica arrived, the prom was already in full swing. She stepped out of the car, holding her head high, savoring the whispers and glances from her classmates. She scanned the crowd, her heart pounding as she searched for Logan. At the entrance, a figure stood waiting. He wore a long coat, his face obscured by a mask. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. Logan, she called out, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. The figure nodded and extended his hand. I thought we'd make a dramatic entrance together, he said, his voice low and mysterious. Jessica's nerves melted away as she smiled, taking his hand. As they walked into the gymnasium together, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to Jessica and her enigmatic date. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people speculated about who the masked man could be. Jessica basked in the attention, feeling like a Hollywood star on a red carpet. Her ex-boyfriend, Mason, stood with his friends near the punch table, watching with a mix of shock and heartbreak. He had been left behind for this moment, and seeing Jessica's triumphant strut with her mysterious partner was a bitter pill to swallow. Jessica and her date made their way to the center of the dance floor. She turned to him with a radiant smile. "I think it's time to reveal yourself," she whispered, eager to show everyone who she had brought to the prom. The masked man nodded and slowly reached for his mask. The crowd held its breath, the tension thick in the air. When the mask finally came off, the room erupted, not in awe, but in laughter. Jessica's eyes widened in horror. Standing before her wasn't Logan, the charming rising star she had been bragging about. Instead, it was an old homeless man, his scruffy beard and missing teeth stark against the glittering backdrop of the prom. His ragged clothes peeked out from beneath the long coat, and his bewildered expression added to the absurdity of the scene. The crowd's laughter grew louder, echoing in the grand hall. Jessica froze, her face turning crimson as the realization sank in. She had been duped. Her ex-boyfriend Mason laughed the loudest, his voice booming over the music. Even Jessica's closest friends couldn't suppress their giggles. The Queen of Jefferson High had been publicly humiliated in the most spectacular fashion. Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes as she fled the dance floor, her gown swishing behind her. She pushed past groups of laughing students, her vision blurred by tears. When she finally made it outside, she collapsed onto a bench, her breaths coming in shallow gasps. But the night wasn't over. As Jessica tried to compose herself, she glanced toward the parking lot and froze. There, stepping out of a car, were Andrew and Rachel. Andrew looked almost unrecognizable. His once slouched figure was now fit and confident, his tailored suit perfectly accentuating his newfound stature. Rachel, standing beside him, looked breathtaking in an elegant dress that complemented her natural beauty. They were a picture of grace and confidence. And for the first time, Jessica felt invisible. The whispers started again, this time about Andrew and Rachel. "Is that Andrew?" someone murmured. "He looks amazing." Jessica couldn't bear it. She jumped into her rented car and sped away, her tears blurring her vision. She didn't care where she was going, she just needed to escape. But in her haste, she missed a turn and crashed into a tree. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass broke the stillness of the night. Jessica stumbled out of the car, shaken but unharmed. The realization hit her like a wave: the car she had rented, the necklace she had stolen to pay for it, the humiliation she had just endured. It all came crashing down. And for the first time, Jessica felt the weight of her choices. Alone in the darkness, she wept, the queen no longer reigning. The crash marked the beginning of Jessica's reckoning. Standing in the cold night air, her luxurious dress torn and her makeup streaked with tears, she realized the gravity of her situation. The car was a wreck, and there was no way she could afford to fix it. Panic began to creep in as she thought about what her parents would say when they found out. Jessica stumbled home, her steps heavy and uncertain. When she reached the front door, she was met with an unexpected obstacle: the door was locked. Confused, she knocked, her hands trembling. She waited, but no one came. Frustrated, she tried again, this time calling out for her mother. The house remained silent. Desperate, Jessica pulled out her phone and called her mom. It rang twice before going to voicemail. Her father didn't pick up either. But as she was about to dial again, a message appeared on her screen. It was from her dad. "We're done. Jessica, go to your grandmother's house. We're tired of the chaos you've brought into our lives." Jessica's world crumbled. She sank onto the porch, her father's words echoing in her mind. They knew. Somehow, they had found out about the necklace she had stolen and sold to fund her prom fantasy. She suspected Andrew might have had a hand in revealing the truth. Memories of her parents' sacrifices came flooding back. They weren't her biological parents, but they had taken her in after her mother, who had worked as a housekeeper for them, passed away. They had given her everything: a home, an education, and a chance to thrive. And how had she repaid them? By lying, stealing, and humiliating others. Her tears came in waves as the weight of her actions bore down on her. Jessica knew there was no way back. Her parents were serious. She would have to leave Jefferson High and move to her grandmother's modest home in a quiet rural town. The next day, Jessica packed her things and boarded a bus bound for her grandmother's house in Alabama. The journey was long, and with each mile, the glittering life she had built for herself seemed further and further away. When she arrived, her grandmother greeted her with a warm but tired smile. "I heard what happened, Jessica," she said softly as they sat in the small living room. "You've got some big mistakes to face." Jessica nodded, too ashamed to speak. Her grandmother didn't berate her, but her disappointment was evident. "You've always had a strong will," she continued, "but you've used it the wrong way. Life here will be different. Simple, but honest." The simplicity of rural life was a stark contrast to the glamour Jessica had grown used to. She spent her days helping her grandmother with chores and reflecting on her choices. For the first time in years, she wasn't surrounded by adoring friends or constant distractions. She was alone with her thoughts. And the truth was painful. Meanwhile, back at Jefferson High, the story of Jessica's downfall spread like wildfire. Students whispered about the prom disaster, her family's disowning of her, and the rumors of her moving to the countryside. Andrew and Rachel, however, didn't revel in her misfortune. They continued to focus on their own lives, growing closer with each passing day. One afternoon, Rachel asked Andrew, "Do you think she'll change?" Andrew hesitated, then replied, "I don't know, but I hope she does. Everyone deserves a chance to grow. Even Jessica." Jessica's time in the countryside wasn't easy. She missed the convenience and luxury of her old life. But she also began to appreciate the lessons her grandmother taught her. They weren't lectures but quiet moments of wisdom shared over cups of tea or while tending the garden. "Kindness isn't weakness," her grandmother once said. "It's strength. And it's something the world needs more of." Jessica thought back to Rachel, to Mrs. Hayes, and even to Andrew. She had treated them all so terribly, but they had shown resilience and grace in the face of her cruelty. Slowly, she began to see the value in humility and empathy. Though it was a long road, Jessica started to change. She helped her grandmother around the house, found small ways to contribute to the community, and began writing letters to her parents, apologizing for everything. Whether they would ever forgive her, she didn't know, but she hoped they might one day see her efforts to be better. Jessica's fall from grace had been hard, but it was also a chance to rebuild. Whether she could ever make amends for her past remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: her life would never be the same. Jessica's life in the countryside was a far cry from the glittering halls of Jefferson High. The days were quiet, the nights even quieter, but within the silence, she found a space to reflect on who she had been and who she wanted to become. Her grandmother's small house, surrounded by fields and trees, became a sanctuary for her bruised soul. At first, Jessica resented the change. She missed the attention, the social life, and the sense of power she had once wielded. But as the weeks turned into months, the simplicity of her new life began to soften her. She spent her days helping her grandmother with chores, baking pies, and tending the garden. The manual labor, though exhausting, gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her grandmother's wisdom guided her through the hardest days. "We all fall, Jessica," she said one evening as they shelled peas on the porch. "But the question is whether we choose to stay down or get back up. Redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning from it." Jessica carried those words with her. And slowly, She began to change. She started volunteering at the local community center, helping children with their homework. Many of the kids came from families like Rachel's, hardworking, struggling to make ends meet. Jessica saw her old self in some of the more arrogant children, and it made her cringe. In those moments, she thought of Rachel and her mother, Mrs. Hayes. Jessica's cruelty toward them was one of her deepest regrets. One evening, as she lay in bed, she decided to write a letter. "Dear Rachel and Mrs. Hayes," it began. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to tell you how sorry I am. What I did to you both was unforgivable, and I carry the shame of it every day. I've left Jefferson High and moved in with my grandmother. Life here is different, simpler, but it's given me time to think. I hope one day I can make amends, even if it's just in a small way." She sealed the letter and sent it the next day. Whether they would reply or not, she didn't know, but writing it felt like a step forward. Meanwhile, back at Jefferson High, Andrew and Rachel were thriving. Andrew's transformation wasn't just physical, he had become more confident and self-assured. He and Rachel had grown closer, their bond deepening with every shared moment. Rachel's mother was released from jail after the truth about the necklace theft was revealed. Andrew, who had found a way to anonymously provide evidence that cleared Mrs. Hayes' name, watched from a distance as Rachel and her mom rebuilt their lives. One afternoon, as Rachel and Andrew sat under the shade of an old oak tree near the school, Rachel brought up Jessica. "I got a letter from her," she said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. Andrew raised an eyebrow. "What did it say?" Rachel handed it to him. As he read, Andrew felt a mix of emotions: anger, sympathy, and something else he couldn't quite place. "Do you think she's really changed?" he asked. Rachel shrugged. "I think she's trying. And that's worth something." Andrew nodded. Deep down, he agreed. If anyone knew how it felt to be weighed down by mistakes, it was him. Months later, Jessica received her first reply. It was a short note from Rachel. "I appreciate your letter. I hope you continue to grow and learn. Wishing you the best." Jessica held the note close, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step, a small opening in a door she thought had been permanently closed. Jessica's journey wasn't over. She still had debts to pay, bridges to mend, and a long road ahead. But she had also discovered something she had never truly understood before: the value of humility, kindness, and the strength it takes to admit you were wrong. As the seasons changed and her grandmother's garden bloomed anew, Jessica found herself planting seeds of her own, seeds of redemption. Watered by her efforts to be better, the glittering life she had once craved seemed shallow now, replaced by something deeper. For Andrew, Rachel, and even Jessica, life had moved forward. The scars of the past hadn't disappeared, but they had become reminders of lessons learned, of strength gained, and of the power of second chances. Sometimes, the brightest light is found in the shadows of our mistakes. And sometimes, it's those mistakes that lead us to discover who we really are. In the end, Jessica's fall from grace wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning of a new one. Life in the countryside taught her lessons that no classroom or high school popularity ever could. She learned that kindness and humility carry more value than status or appearances. Though it took time, she began to rebuild her life, one small step at a time. Meanwhile, Andrew and Rachel continued their journey together, their bond growing stronger with every shared moment. Both had learned that true strength lies in resilience and compassion. This story is a reminder that while mistakes can hurt and humiliation can sting, they also offer the chance for growth and redemption. Everyone deserves a second chance if they are willing to change. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales.